Guys, I want to have some fun now with a very important concept, and I recently did a video on if statements, which are so central and crucial to programming and scripting concepts, and it got me thinking that I really need to move on to that other crucial concept to understand in scripting and programming, and that is loops or for each loops. And so again, like the if statement, where I did a very basic example of that to introduce people to the concept, I'm going to spend this video doing the same thing. So let's get started. Now, as you will know from a recent video, I created a variable, a file with a list of random country names, and put that into an array variable that I could work with. I'm going to use that same example in this. So to do this, I'm going to do the get content command with a path to my temp folder and my country's text file. So if I run line 2 and look at the variable, you can see that I've got this great list of fantastic countries here. Now with that list, we can start to work with it because we've got multiple items in there. In fact, actually, let me bring this back up again. You can see that we've got a long list of countries there, 23 to be exact. And these represent individual items or objects within an array. Of course, this country's variable being an array. Like at the object type there, you can see that we have an array. So, with that being said, let me start to put together a for each loop and loop through and get some interesting output from this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say for each left bracket, and I'm going to put I am creating an object at this stage. This is a temporary sort of variable that will exist within my for each loop. So for each C being for country. Now this is a Don Jones technique. It's something that I learned watching and reading Don Jones videos and articles. He believes that it makes a lot of sense to create a sort of variable within your for each loop that is only a single letter. And the reason for this, and I'll finish the bit of code here, is because what I want to do is I want to work with each item, each country within my countries array. And what he suggests is if you just put a sort of $C in this example, C for country, it makes it very obvious what is the array. You got this big name, full name here, countries. It's bigger. It suggests that's the array. And this little object here, there's a single letter, which is just going to represent one individual country. Now, one thing that confused me hugely when I first got into programming and scripting and things like that, I mean, especially with for each statement, for each loops in PowerShell, the thing that confused me was I thought, because I saw so many examples where I think it was like an I, and I think it's because a lot of people like to put a $I, as in for item, individual item in there for each loops. I thought that you had to put $I as your item. So let me finish this example and I'll come back to this point. So much like an if statement, my main logic now sits between parentheses. So what I am going to do is I'm going to put right host, and then I want to print to the screen hello and the name of the country. Okay, that is literally it. That is 3 lines of code, and that's only because I've got a right parentheses sat here on its own. In fact, if I felt so inclined, that is 1 line of code. Now I hate this layout, and perhaps I should do a separate video to talk about different PowerShell layout approaches. But I tell you what, I am going to leave this for now so you can see how simple a for each loop is. So if I run this, you can see that it prints to the screen, hello Argentina, hello Brazil, hello USA, and so forth. And This is very helpful. In fact, this is critical in programming and scripting uh, in this world, because you are going to find yourself working with huge amounts of information where you potentially need to get something from many objects that sit in a database or a spreadsheet or a text file like this, and you need to be able to do something with every single object in there. A great example is, and in fact we'll do this very, very shortly, is you may need to modify something in a list, and to do that manually is horrible and incredibly inefficient. And the whole point, and I'm sure most of you who are watching this are learning about this sort of thing because you already understand these things. If you want to be able to boost productivity, especially in a work environment, or just save time on some project you're doing for yourself, you cannot afford to update or change or get information manually, especially in the sort of list you have to work with. So let's take this one a bit further, and for my own sanity, I would like to just put this layout back now. So I'm sorry if that was easier to look at with just the one line of code, but I hate it. I cannot stand that. So I'm going back to this layout that I'm more comfortable with. Now, to try and make this example a bit more useful for everybody, I am going to perhaps do something a little bit different. Now, I'm going to come back to one thing. It does not matter what you call this variable. This just simply does not matter. Now, what I'm going to do is change this to be what I would normally do in this scenario, and that is to whatever my array is called. Because the first letter is a C, then my items I'm going to call a C. My array is called countries. My individual items within here are going to be letter C's. So now watch what happens. It's not worked properly, and it's because I've left this as an I. Now the reason why it's seemingly randomly saying Fiji is simply because if I look at my $I, it's Fiji, and my suspicion is very much that when I ran this originally, Fiji was probably the last variable in there. Let's see if that's correct, and let me clear the screen. Yes, so you can see Fiji. When the loop ran through each of these countries and said, hello Argentina, hello Brazil, blah, 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 Fiji was the last country. And so that $I sign was left there. You know, I've referred to it as being a temporary variable, but it is not temporary. It will stay in your runtime. It left that as Fiji. And so that was a very long-winded way to explain the mistake that I had made. So let me change this to be C, and we will get exactly the same output as we had earlier, with each country saying hello to each country. There we go. Now we can add a little bit more to this if we feel so inclined. I'm going to do more comprehensive videos on ForEach loops because ForEach loops are extremely central to reporting, something that I have a good deal of experience with. But we can also start to add additional items in here, like let's just say something like C is a great country. Although this is starting to get a bit cluttered now. Now this is also in a list form, but you can also work with objects. Now let's make a couple of changes here. I am going to show you how you can also modify information. So as you have seen from this example, I have a list of countries. Well, let's say that I want to modify each of these, and I'm trying to find a good example of what we could do. Perhaps we could do something like, let's have a look at some of the methods we've got here. I'm trying to remind myself to upper. That could be good. There we go. So the to upper method will capitalize any word you have in there. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to, for each country in my countries array, I am going to capitalize the name of the country, and then I'm going to say hello and that country. In fact, I've made this far too complicated. I did not need to have the 2 steps there. So let's change that to upper. Okay, let's turn this into its own variable. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a variable with the capitalized names of the countries, then write hello, just so it is a little bit less cluttered. And there we go. So I have managed to change every single entry in here without having to write that manually. And to take this further, what you might decide to do is you may decide that having done all of that, you want to output that into a file. So I could update countries with that. I will come back to that in another video, but hopefully this has given you some very basic understanding of how a for each loop works. There is a lot more that we need to cover on this topic, which I will come back to.